Hi, I'm your host for this video, Clark Brooks of On3 and SEC StatCat. So we're going to go over the top Core 4 returning passers based on this season's impact study, where we wanted to focus on good, who helped elevate their teams and show next level traits. So we're going to cut out all the poop states and awful A&Ms from their slates and look at their 5, 6, 7 hardest opponents, so you can get a little bit of a higher sample size, get a better idea of who they are and how they project to play into 2024. So here's our crop right here. Feel free to skip ahead any chapter you want to see if you don't want to sit through me talking through every single one of them. But I think it's going to be a helpful exercise, especially because you will not find anyone else talk about these quarterbacks this way. Okay, QB1, Carson Beck. A lot of people's pick to be the top quarterback taken in April's draft because he checks a lot of boxes. He's 6'4", he's a former 5-star, he plays on a really good team, and he captures fantastic results. As you'll see here in a second when we break out his impact statistics, he was a top performer regardless of the category. So he just looks the part. Again, he's 6'4", he can see over the line very well. All areas of the field are available to him, either short, intermediate, and deep. Inside the hashes to outside the numbers, it's all there. He can layer throws and vary his speeds fantastically. So he can have some touch throws around some zone defenders over the second level linebackers, or he can rifle it in there with a fastball. Some of his best throws on tape are where he has a stationary route where he can target someone's frame and hit them in the numbers. Things like curls, hitches, comebacks, back shoulder fades. Those things consistently shine, particularly in the mid-range game. So that's 11 to 20 yards downfield. But he's also very keen to check it down when the defense presents him wins. And he plays in a scheme that does give him some, let's just say, gimmies. High screen, RPO, drop back play action rate. Georgia has been consistently high in the SEC, giving their quarterbacks those types of scheme elements, and he is no exception last year. And I think his timing and his anticipation are one of his best traits, but things that are definitely areas of opportunity. Even though he is 6'4", he doesn't have the girthiest frame. He can be jostled and moved off his mark, and that can lead to some inconsistencies, particularly when pressured. So that is one of the highest red flags on his impact study profile, is his nearly 20% interceptable pass rate when pressured. Oh goodness. Major concern, and that has to be fixed moving forward. And again, when he doesn't have those scheme elements, those ample scheme elements I mentioned earlier, he is a mortal passer at this point in time, and he has to address his, let's say, propensity to put the ball into harm's way. So you'll see sometimes his elbow will drop, and even though he is 6'4", that's not necessarily a good process thing. Lower release point, and of course that allows those big boys up front to get their mitts up, potentially get some deflections, and cause even more turnover-worthy plays. That is just something you just cannot see. And even though I think he has a fairly good arm, I don't think it's elite, especially in the sense of where he can lead guys vertically downfield towards their upfield shoulders, away from tight coverage, towards open green grass. So some things you'll see on tape, while he is a generally great placer of catchable balls, ideal accuracy is a little dull. You'll see particularly the Auburn and Missouri games. Those are I would say, his rockiest performances, at least in our impact study. Those are things that shine areas for him to work on, but still, entering this season, he just has a lot of things that you like to see, especially compared to his peers. You can say he's an offensive executive, whatever. He's going to have a high pass floor because of his environment. And again, he does have that prerequisite accuracy to go get downfield completions and be a consistent placer of the football that gives his guys opportunities to come down with completions. So here is Carson Beck's pass chart against his hardest opponents. That would be Auburn, Kentucky, Missouri, Ole Miss, Tennessee, and Alabama. A lot of green circles. Those are touchdowns. That is what we like to see. And even though there is a decent amount of volume in the short and behind the line of scrimmage game, his downfield target rate was one of the highest in our impact study. Again, I like to think he's a mid-range master, but we can quickly see there are 2 interceptions between the hashes targeting those congested areas and deep outside the numbers on both sides of the field. That is a little bit of a shortcoming in his game. Schematically, we know that Georgia did not change stuff year over year despite the offensive coordinator change. It still featured a decent amount of floods, particularly weak side floods like cross and play action bootlegs, slants paired with the spot, triangle concept, plenty of outlets behind the line of scrimmage. All verts showed up a decent amount. Switches were seen a decent amount. So yeah, not a whole lot of variation year over year within the scheme. A lot of little fun elements to help guys come open. And of their 10 most targeted pass concepts in our impact sample here, they all received at least 9 targets. All but 2 finished with at least a 53% success rate. That is a very nice way to go out and take care of business. Here are the statistics that we were talking about. Lots of green across the board, very high yards per attempt, success rate, first down touchdown rate, explosive. We're one of the tops in the group. Sure-handed receivers because he threw a very catchable ball. As we know, he was not overly pressured downfield. We just mentioned the deep stuff was not the sharpest. It was only average relative to everybody else, but very nice mid-range returns, and that helped his overall downfield spray remain one of the tops in the group. Pressured, as we mentioned, high interceptable. That is a major backbreaking thing. Below average downfield accuracy and catchability in this regard. He's got to get better in that. Drop back accuracies basically mirror his overall stuff. And when using play action, he was especially explosive, seeing 40% of his passes gain at least 20 yards, almost 2/3 of them finding situational success, averaging nearly 15 yards per pop. That is absolutely a reflection of how dynamic that scheme helped facilitate his bottom line. Outside the pocket, on those bootlegs or otherwise, really nice, keeping his team ahead of the chains. And of course, in structure, without those guys, he was particularly fine, but that interceptable pass rate tracking towards average is worth monitoring, as is that uncatchable pass rate that is pretty mid as well. Everything else in the green is what you like to see, but still there are a little bit of concerns he can address. Okay, Quinn Ewers. He's not necessarily the biggest guy, kind of average frame, and it remains to be seen if he's going to put the weight that he lost back on. But one thing is true, he's got a live arm. He does not need a whole lot of effort to drive it downfield, either on a line or via moonshot. Just think of that very, very sexy Xavier Worthy touchdown against Alabama last year. Like, oh my gosh. Again, he has very good anticipation. Even though it didn't really translate into accurate passes in 2022, this past season, his downfield accuracy, especially deep, took a major leap. He uses a whole lot of scheme elements playing for Steve Sarkisian, and yeah, you can call him an offensive executive, but one area that he was really, really strong when everything broke down, he was phenomenal against pressure back-to-back years. Against his hardest opponents last year, he was 3 times more likely to throw an explosive pass than an interceptable when under duress. That is unheard of. And when he was outside of that pocket, again, that live arm really shined. When he didn't necessarily have his feet under him or he was throwing from odd, inconsistent platforms, balls arrived and he delivered very, very nice results in that aspect. But again, people can just claim he's an offensive executive because he's really helped out not only by screens, RPOs, and play actions, but ample motion that help predetermine his reads on collapsing safeties depending on what type of tactic that Steve Sarkisian is utilizing on any given play. It's just when he's not using those scheme elements, it's a major red flag that back-to-back years, his accuracy, his ball placement, his interceptable, they finish below the impact average. And back-to-back years, less than 30% of the sample was a clean drop back without play action inside the pocket, insinuating the scheme is doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And again, even though he's really good outside the pocket, he's not a design rusher. He is not a sack eraser, which is something that scouts at the next level have to see. They're going to guarantee that plays are going to break down and they're going to need some backyard heroes. But it doesn't look like Ewers has been necessarily elite in that regard. So even though he is a nimble guy, in terms of throwing, finding throwing lanes, and manipulating pockets in that sense, getting rid of rushers when they have their mitts on them, not something he is particularly good at. But still, he's going to be in a good environment this year. He's got great arm. He is improving with his accuracy. He is improving with his delivery. So if he can consistently keep the ball out of harm's way, again, keep up that fantastic play against pressure, there's no reason in my mind that he cannot contend for a Heisman, and Texas will not make the playoff. So here's Quinn Ewers' pass chart against his hardest opponents. That would be Alabama, Oklahoma, TCU, Iowa State, Texas Tech, and Washington. A decent amount of stuff behind the line of scrimmage. Basically, a fifth of his targeted concepts were a tree screen or a check down. So plenty of usage there. But looking at his downfield makeup, so those are throws beyond 10 yards, past the line of scrimmage, his 44% clip was one of the highest in our impact study. You can see his improved year-over-year verticality. You can see his improved year-over-year returns, getting deep completions. Some stuff along the sideline, that's fantastic. Some good stuff working left. That is encouraging to see that he doesn't overly focus on his dominant side, but he's got to get a little bit more consistent targeting all areas of the field. In terms of schemes and concepts, we know that this offense likes to use a lot of motion and a lot of play action, as aforementioned. Flood variants were fairly visible, both strong and weak side flood. So those are sail and cross. Smashes were one of their more consistent looks. Solo shots, curl seam combos, those were also fairly consistent looks. But all verts, mesh, slants, they all came in below the average of types of returns. And of course, switch variations were also seen a little bit, getting 9 targets and delivering 7 successful completions. His overall statistics generally beat the impact average. As you can see, everything is green with the exception of a fairly moderate sack rate and a below average depth of target because of those things behind the line of scrimmage pulling him down. But when we were isolating on his downfield stuff, he had one of the lowest uncatchable pass rates in this area of the field and one of the highest completion percentages because of those nice mid-range numbers that we mentioned. But again, his completion, accuracy, and uncatchable deep did finish in the green, even if over a fifth of those chances had potential to be picked off. His arm talent shined under the gun, as we mentioned. Almost a quarter of these throws resulted in a gain of at least 20 yards, and it helped his yards per attempt be one of the top marks, as well as just a surefire guy to get completions. His adjusted completion percentage was near the top of the group. And in the drop back game, yeah, it was a little bit more mediocre and fine, but over half of his throws found situational success, and he did generally finish on the right side of the conference average. And definitely his potency was helped by his play action, and he did minimize mistakes in those situations as well. But his off-platform throws, his fun throws outside the pocket, you gotta like how he shined with the top adjusted completion percentage in the group, while also seeing over half of those throws find success. So in structure, that's where there's a little bit of concern. Again, all of his ball placement metrics finished in the red. That is a pretty sizable red flag entering this upcoming season, even if his results were in the green. So if he's going to have to be overly reliant on guys, his upside might not be as high as assumed. Jaxson Dart, one of the more aptly named quarterbacks in our crop. And let's just start there with his wonderful ability to be a master of the mid-range. So that is an area where the scheme of Ole Miss likes to attack, and for good reason. He delivered excellent accuracy on those types of throws. Excellent results on those types of throws. So very strong lower body that allows him to put some extra oomph on those throws that beats tight windows and leads guys horizontally. So even though, end of the day, I would not say Dart has elite arm talent or elite speed, he does find wins within his own means. And I would say it was more of a feathery operation than more of a hard thrower, but still, you just gotta like that lower body. Again, I already mentioned how it translates to the downfield throws, but in the run game, how he consistently, dating back to his days at USC, was a very balanced guy, was not necessarily pushed backward a whole lot, and played with his shoulders over his knees consistently. He was not afraid to get his jersey dirty, to put it another way. He's very keen on getting north and south and finding green grass with very nice vision. And even though, again, he cannot necessarily win every edge, he knows how to find situational wins based on his limitations. He's very, very difficult to bring down one-on-one outside the pocket. His pressure to sack ratio was excellent. Still, I would say the Texas A&M game was a very nice example, top to bottom, of all of his traits. But you got to like the fact that even though the scheme does a lot of the heavy lifting for him, again, super spread, lane kiffing, high level of eye candy, play action, and scheme elements, he still was very good moving off his reads if the first read was not open and finding something underneath or towards the second level. So hopefully he can take the next step, being a little bit more potent, a little bit more consistent, and not putting the ball into harm's way. Because he doesn't have the cleanest drop back mechanics. Again, it's a super spread type of thing. It's very wide open. He's not supposed to necessarily deal in muddy pockets a whole lot. He's not necessarily supposed to go from under center unless, it's a deception type of tactic. So traditional type of stuff, he's still got to perform. He has a little bit of a heel clicky drop back, which can throw off his balance, his accuracy, his results. So he's got to address that. He's got to be a little bit more consistent. And his work inside the pocket is just a little rusty right now. Even though he is, I would say, a very sturdy kid. Again, we already mentioned with that strong lower body. The way he can pat the ball and invite pressure and get knocked back. There were a number of interceptable passes last year when he just held the ball a beat too long, invited pressure, and allowed them to hit him and cause a turnover-worthy play. So there are not many throw and chase examples when he is rolling outside the pocket. So again, that's just another process issue that throws off his end of play results. You want to get that motion going, and that is a little bit more side to side where he kind of throws, he's kind of fading away, and that causes passes to lose zip and allows defenders sometimes to undercut that stuff. Even though I do think very highly of him because of his dual threat nature, there's no denying that his environment elevates him, and that's something to monitor moving forward. Here is Jaxson Dart's pass chart against his hardest opponents. That would be Alabama, Arkansas, Auburn, Texas A&M, Georgia, and Penn State. What immediately jumps out is the high usage and efficiency targeting outside the numbers. He really did paint the sideline. That was a high source of his numbers, particularly in his great mid-range returns. So there wasn't a whole lot of stuff between the hashes, particularly downfield. There weren't a whole lot of field-stretching throws on his profile, but he still generated a high number of key completions. So in terms of concepts, this offense, naturally, as you can imagine, with Dart wanting to target outside the numbers, it featured the strong side flood concept, sail. Ironically, the returns were below average. So other things that showed up on tape, all curls, both in the dropback and RPO game, all verts, slant variations, opposite things, both all slants and option route slants, those showed up. Solo shots, like fades, other up and down looks like stick, curl seams, they rounded out their looks, but nothing was overly inefficient. Short, stick, and mesh came in with a success rate below 25% each. Looking at his general statistics, they hint he can definitely be one of the top quarterbacks in college football. High explosiveness. When you're looking at his downfield offerings, definitely checking boxes, definitely performing better than most quarterbacks. Now, speaking of those interceptable passes, there was a high concentration of them on his deep attempts. But when we're looking at him under the gun, against pressure, playing hot potato, he, again, finished on the right side of the group average, and he generally did not put the ball into harm's way with a strong downfield accuracy figure. So on true dropbacks without screens and RPOs, fairly okay returns, but he was definitely explosive. Nearly 19% of his attempts gained at least 20 yards, but other shortcomings were accentuated a little bit. His interceptable pass rate was still kind of average. His general accuracy was still kind of average. His uncatchable pass rate was still kind of average. And he had a sub 42% success rate. So play action definitely did help buoy him. When outside the pocket in particular, he was completely useless. A sub 13% first down touchdown rate with nothing basically standing out. But in structure, you got to like the optimism because he remained explosive, he wasn't overly careless with the football, and he had really strong catchability numbers. okay, Shedeur Sanders, he'll technically be a pocket passer archetype because that's where a lot of his damage comes, inside the pocket in structure. But don't kid yourself. He's a natural athlete, very fluid on the move. Nice mechanics. There's no hitches in his delivery. The ball comes out quick when he likes his target. So when he's on the move, he can flip the ball vertically with little trouble and passes arrive. And in structure, you could argue his deep ball is his best trait. Very nice, hitting the upfield shoulder in stride, putting it only where his pass catcher can get it. But again, it's just, can you get the ball out without him buffering? Can you get his pre-snap and his post-snap to evolve to where if defenses give him a little bit of a tricky look, he knows where to go to the ball and gets off his first read. So it's very green flag that in structure, again, clean dropbacks without play action inside the pocket, high accuracy figures, high success rates. You like to see that because down to down, that is a very high floor type of deal. That's a massive green flag and why a lot of people want to think that he has first round potential. And because the offense is so voluminous, they're going to pass a whole lot. That down-to-down stuff, you're just going to know he's going to be able to take a lot of business. And he doesn't put the ball into harm's way a whole lot. He's very keen on that. But the other side of the coin, he holds the ball a little bit too long. As we all know, he can invite pressure. He takes a whole lot of sacks. In our impact study, he had twice as many taking sacks as erase sacks against his hardest opponent. So lacking anticipation, lacking seeing something coming open and delivering there. He's a lot more see it, throw it type of thing. Again, that is not uncommon with a lot of youngsters. Again, he was moving from the lower levels to the Power 5 last year. There was going to be some type of learning curve in that respect, but the ball just has to come out faster moving forward. You can only blame the offensive line so much on these things. Again, he had multiple RPO sacks in his sample. Those are supposed to be bang-bang plays where the ball can come out quick, but he just, for whatever reason, buffered, hung onto the ball, just did not pull the trigger. And he is not a dedicated, let's say, play action, deception artist at this time. Now, the scheme didn't really use a whole lot of type of stuff like that. It just preferred to either do a true drop back or a screen or an RPO or something like that. But he just really didn't want to sell play fakes. He didn't want to entice the defense. I don't know if that was a thing. He was afraid to drop his eyes because when those eyes drops and he takes his eyes off of the coverage and the chaos ensues, he's a far less effective player. As we saw with that taking sacks and in backyard ball, he does not look to push the ball downfield. In general, very low degree of explosiveness. Now, some that can be explained because the scheme likes to pepper short. The ball's just got to come out, and he's got to understand that he just can't do that against every opponent. So again, when the pre and the post snap align, very nice. It's just when he's thrown a curveball and he has to hold that ball for an extra beat, can you keep your eyes up downfield and work the pocket that way? Or do you always have to be a guy that breaks out of rank and tries to just find somebody in the flat that way? So that's one area to monitor for him. But of course, moving forward, his dad's going to put him in a lot of situations to succeed. They're going to pass the ball a whole lot. He's going to put up a whole lot of numbers. But can he get rid of these warts so he can be our potential first-round pick? Right away on Shedeur Sanders' pass chart, you can see just how he really did favor the short game. And he was fairly lethal on those targets. It didn't matter if it was left, right, or middle. He just was consistently getting completions there. But it was the downfield stuff that was a little bit of inconsistent. Again, he did not have a lot of potency. And when you're looking at his stuff outside the numbers and along the sideline, that was a big, big shortcoming for his game. So when we're looking at his downfield wins, it's nice to see that they were fairly average, but he's got to take a step up in that regard. And looking at the scheme itself, it was fairly up and down. It was fairly vertical on that route stem. All verts, all curls, shock, unders, slants, shot variations. The problem was not a lot of them were consistent. Outside of unders and slants, none of them topped a 50% success rate among looks that got at least 10 targets. So his pre-snap and his post-snap just have to get better, and he can't always just take what the defense gives him. He's got to be able to hang in the pocket, manipulate, and throw downfield more often. He's got to throw a little bit more teeth than what he's presently shown. And the safe approach hits us right away looking at his overall stats with a high adjusted completion percentage and generally passable ball placement figures. That said, his explosive pass rate, his first down touchdown,
and his average depth of target were all on the low side. Now, I do think it is really interesting, though, that there wasn't a whole lot of consistency with his concepts, but his down-to-down success rate was above the conference average. But when we're breaking out his downfield stuff, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. A catchable deep ball, but not necessarily overly accurate. Fairly moderate mid-range numbers, but a high degree of uncatchables. Still, you gotta like the fact he's not putting the ball into harm's way. He wasn't a backbreaker against pressure or outside the pocket, but he didn't really help elevate his team in that regard. But the thing that is a good sell for him is when he is in structure. When he is not pressured, he is inside the pocket, he likes what he sees, the ball comes out quick, and he captures great results. He had the top success rate in our group in floor passing situations, and he was 4 times more likely to log an explosive pass than an interceptable. Sure, taking the sure things can be a little less sexy at times, but when you're this efficient doing so, you absolutely give yourself a high passing floor.
Jalen Milroe, one of the nation's most potent playmakers at the quarterback position. Despite only being 6'2", 200 pounds, kind of average, he is undeniably tantalizing with his physical traits. And again, that's his best selling point, is his just raw arm strength and blazing speed ability in the open field. He can turn a doomed play into a new set of downs or 6 points in the blink of an eye. And when we're looking at his verticality, how the ball just jumps off his hand, we know that he leans into that vertical style of play with a high average depth of target, but no SECer in the history of SEC StatCat has seen a higher percentage of their yards come on deep targets than his 40% clip this past season. Just in a whole class of his own in that regard. So very boom or bust, and very reliant on late downs to take care of business. Now, forget about the Iron Bowl and that long 4th down, awesome gravedigger touchdown pass. He consistently took care of business on 3rd and 4th down. Not to say that he was a slouch on 1st and 2nd, but his 3rd down numbers were often better than a lot of other SECers on early downs. And that should tell you, because the degree of difficulty on those one-off situations are much higher than 1st and 10 when everything is standardized. So just how the ball jumps off his hands, his longest throw in our sample was 49 yards past the line of scrimmage. Again, very little effort to get it there. And again, he's a very blazing athlete in the open field. Besides the fact that he buffers and takes sacks, which we'll talk about in a second, he can scramble very, very effectively and consistently stress defenses in that manner. So again, he can score on any play. Besides the ability to buffer and take sacks and not necessarily trust what he likes to see and invite pressures, concerning, but also is the general inaccuracy. So yes, there's going to be a higher degree of difficulty throwing downfield more often than the average bear, but still, when you weight adjust them, still kind of iffy, still kind of mediocre, not necessarily a standout in that regard. And again, when we're looking at our impact study, dropbacks, so those no screens, no RPOs, less than half were on target. That's a concerning red flag. He's got to be more consistent at that. He's got to be more dependable. And because of his stature, like a lot of kind of average-sized quarterbacks, he doesn't really like to look to target over the field a whole lot. A lot of his sample was picking at opponents outside the numbers on a simple high-low. Now, we'll talk about the concepts here in a second, but yeah, not a whole lot of trust delivering stuff between the numbers over the middle. Now, downfield, deep, that's a different story, but in the short and intermediate game, there's not a whole lot of trust there. And because of that, held on to the ball a little bit longer, invited the pressures, and took the sacks. Very, very back-breaking sack rate that has to be addressed moving forward.
Right away, Jalen Milroe's verticality pops on his pass chart. A lot of green circles, downfield, particularly deep like we just mentioned. So his sample is against Texas, Ole Miss, A&M, Arkansas, Georgia, and Michigan. So in addition to seeing that verticality pop on his pass chart, there is a high number of passes short outside of the numbers. Like I mentioned, he does like to take high-low reads, commonly featured opposite weak side floods. And those are where he generally threw because defenses sagged off. So, yeah, a very dink and chunk operation. Not a whole lot of stuff towards the middle of the field, nor behind the line of scrimmage. Again, floods, particularly weak side floods, play action bootlegs, and cross were the most targeted in our meaningful minutes sample here. Alverts came next in line, and then the more efficient of the three patterns, smash variations, like I mentioned with those high-lows outside of the numbers. So both floods and Alverts combined for basically a 33% success rate. That's just not going to cut it for, obviously, a down-to-down dependable quarterback. But rubs and Portland shots, of course, the shot plays, they definitely shined in our meaningful minutes sample here. Milroe's inconsistency shined through that poor overall accuracy percentage. Barely half of his attempts were on target. Now, naturally, that's going to hurt anyone's bottom line. Now, even downfield, he still was relatively average when weighting everything out, since he wasn't necessarily the best intermediate thrower. Again, as we saw on his pass chart, he hardly targeted the middle of the field. He was definitely more keen to get deep completions rather than optimally place deep balls. As a young passer, as a playmaker, as a guy who plays backyard ball, you got to like the fact that he generally did get good results against pressure. Now, his overall accuracy still could improve, but still, that is, got to like to see that he was still a dynamic playmaker in that sense. Can he maintain that? That remains to be seen, because the process is still poor. Across the board, poor accuracy, poor accuracy, poor accuracy. It really does hurt a lot of the projections for this next season, because it's going to be really hard to replicate that again if less than half of his dropback attempts are on target. Now, even though he is an athlete, he can snatch wins inside, outside the pocket, downfield in a dynamic way. It's just really a concern. But still, when you isolate him inside the pocket, without any guises, checking out his passing floor, the verticality remains, the above average results remain, the explosiveness remains. He's not throwing the ball in the harm's way, but still track to have below average ball placement figures. With a change in scheme, he's got to be a more dependable down-to-down ball placer to give his guys better opportunities to make plays.
Dillon Gabriel is a great college quarterback, but it remains to be seen if he'll be draftable, because he's not the biggest guy. He's only 5'11". Across his college career, it's undeniable that he's gotten stronger, he's gotten more savvy, his processing power has increased, and he's just become a lot more of a consistent passer. The vertical drive has improved, like I mentioned, and I really do credit that for his lower body getting a little bit stronger. So he used to be a moonshot artist with high arcing deep balls. Of course, when they landed on target, they're very pretty, but most of the time they invited contests and therefore interceptables a little bit more often than the average passer, and that's just never good when you give, of course, opponents opportunities to get you off the field. So year over year, though, his strengthening legs and his comfortability within the scheme also translated to him being one of the best mid-range passers. So he kind of has a little bit of a left-handed Bo Nix type of operation. He has a little bit of a Tua Tagovailoa operation. The ball comes out quick, on time, right in the frame. Very little to worry about, but it's just because of his size, 5'11" again, listed, that he is a little bit of a concern. Now, one area where he also improved was pressure. Again, the quick trigger, he tended to beat pressures that way. He wasn't necessarily a great eraser himself, but ball came out quick, tended to beat guys, and they were generally on target with a very low uncatchable pass rate. So what does he have to improve on? He has to shed the offensive executive label. I don't think that's going to be able to happen going to Oregon. Of course, last year, Bo Nix had one of the lowest average depths of target himself, with a high rate of passes behind the line of scrimmage, so and plenty of scheme elements. So I think Dillon Gabriel is well suited to take care of business, but it's just, his perception for guys at the next level. Can he show that his downfield offerings are indeed not a mirage, throwing to wide open guys, that he can throw guys open against tight coverage and all that type of stuff. So again, he does have still plenty of boogie. He's got to prove that he can erase sacks. a better deal. Again, not the biggest guy. That's a tough ask. He might just have to do the Tua Tagovailoa route and just be Mr. Quick Trigger as much as he can. So you can see right away that Gabriel was a point guard quarterback. Lots of stuff outside of the numbers, short, attacking the flat. But we got to like the fact that you see a lot of green and not a lot of interception icons. So as a left-handed quarterback, he did favor his dominant side along the sideline there, peppering it there. And you got to like the fact that you have a lot of icons towards the edge of the graph, saying that he's not just a short-oriented quarterback. He can drive the ball and find wins that way. Oklahoma's offense last year, it leaned heavily on Y cross. Just alone, that was practically 10% of his plays, a 54% success rate. Very nice. Outside of that, it was slant variations, divide, 989, and all curls. Everything else received less than 10 targets in our meaningful minute sample here. But a fairly balanced offense in terms of how they approach things. Sure, it was conservative in some senses, featuring true screens and him checking it down with the aforementioned slants, but still he is a good, capable college passer that seems to be able to attack all areas of the field. He finished above the impact average across the board on his overall statistics despite an 11.1% drop rate. He has the capability to find downfield wins. And against pressure, again, massive year-over-year improvement, a 48% success rate and a 42% first down touchdown rate, best in the group. In true dropback situations, again, across the board, above the average despite his drop rate basically occurring on 1 out of 8 targets on average. Now, his explosiveness did go down, and even though there is a little bit of a concern that he was only an average passer using play action, the Ducks should feature a decent amount of deception, so that's something to keep in mind on. How explosive can he be within structure? Because outside of the pocket this past season, he does not look to be a dynamic extender or a dynamic eraser. He needs to be a quick processor inside the pocket. To that point, his passing floor is fantastic because of his ability just to be able to put pinpoints on guys. The lowest uncatchable pass rate, the highest depth adjusted accuracy in this context in our impact study, leading with a 60% success rate. Sure, he might be focusing short for surefire completions, but his overall efficiency can absolutely help overcome a low explosive pass rate. Cam Ward puts it all together this fall. He can shoot up draft boards. Now, he is of average size, so that's a little bit of a drawback. You know, he doesn't necessarily see the field all that well, and we'll talk about that more in a second. But look, undeniably talented, undeniable bouncy athlete going from 0 to 60 to seize available real estate or to drive the ball vertically. He's got the tools you want to succeed. And this past season, he showed he was a little bit more of a consistent, accurate passer. Of course, throwing downfield, not always being on the same page as wide receivers, just being a little bit off the last several years. But this past season, being a little bit more focused towards the line of scrimmage, he was able to complete more surefire things. And when he did target beyond 10 yards downfield on the rare occasions, again, in our impact study, he had the lowest chunk of passes over 10 yards amongst the entire group. So again, that's really focusing short. But when he did target downfield, he was still on target. You could say that maybe selection bias came into play. He was only targeting passes he knew he could complete. Same time, he saw his interceptable pass rate more than double against his hardest opponents year over year. And that's just, a little bit of a red flag. Still, he can stretch the field. He has excellent depth adjusted accuracy, and he was strong at all levels this past season. So accuracy matters to me. It's just, is that a mirage with a different style of play, a different offense? Of course, he's going to be in a different system entirely at Miami, but still going to be more suited to his strengths, to where I think he can do a fairly good job. Because even the past 2 seasons, despite kind of switching schemes year over year, he was a good quarterback. Audibling, getting guys lined up, making sure that the protection was right. He showed pretty good signs of that. He wasn't always looking to the sideline and getting the direction from his coaches to do so. And because he was just so accurate within structure, his passing floor remains really high entering this season. So you got to like that. But again, like I mentioned, too many interceptables across the board, below the impact average. That is not a good look. He holds the ball onto too long, too much. Again, when he likes what he sees and the ball comes out quickly, that's fantastic. But he needs to have better anticipation in that regard. He needs to be a much more premier post-snap processor. And on occasion, he will throw from an unset base. But sometimes his upper body can make up for it, but still, unset bases, that's generally going to lead to inaccurate passes, and sometimes that can just be a complete biff thrown right towards a defender. So moving forward, you don't want to see him drop his eyes. You want to keep his eyes up, like I was talking earlier, being able to truly be a pocket passer, manipulate his throwing lanes, and again, make sure that those downfield offerings that he just showed were not a mirage. Cam Ward's hardest opponents last year were Wisconsin, Oregon State, UCLA, Arizona, Oregon, and Washington. And against those opponents, you can really see that conservative modus operandi, how the staff reined him in, how there's a lot of targets near the line of scrimmage and in just the short areas of the field in general. Now, you can see along the right sideline, some of those attempts absolutely came on backyard balls, just trying to hit guys late outside of structure, but that was often a source for boo-boo throws. So not too much stuff deep downfield, but he was a little bit more selective, and he was basically all or nothing in the fact that he was either delivering a dime or a very, very risky type of pass. So conceptually, what that offense was doing, of course, with the short stuff, stick, mesh, slants, quick outs, spacing. So think of that as the classic Hank or poker play, the curl flat combo. That was featured plenty. In addition to just generic floods, sail, and cross with Allverts. Allverts, interestingly enough, had one of the highest success rates in our meaningful minutes sample here. But he's going to have a similar scheme in the fact he's not using a whole lot of deception tactics. He's going to use a lot of these basic air raid staples to move down to down, so he has a lot of experience with that. It's just, can you give us a little bit more downfield production, and is this accuracy a mirage or a thing to stay? Statistically, even if he does maintain this good accuracy, it's no guarantee that good results will follow. Below average first down touchdown rate, below average explosive, and the success rate itself was nothing special. Again, when you target deep downfield and you have one of the group's best deep accuracies, deep returns, you're certainly going to get a lot of people's attention, even if there are selection bias claims. Now, intermediate passes, they were a high source of those turnover-worthy throws, like I mentioned, along the right sideline. Sometimes when plays broke down, boo-boo types of stuff. Even if he is generally accurate, under pressure, almost a tenth of his throws in those contexts resulted in an interceptable pass, and all of his result metrics were below the impact average. Even when you strip away screens and RPOs, that just gets even worse as his sample is less diluted. One of the highest adjusted completion percentages, we saw that very conservative modus operandi, a lot of targets close to the line of scrimmage, and not much play action usage to give himself a little extra potency. And in that backyard ball type situation, just did not elevate his offense below average across the board in that aspect. So you've got to like the fact, though, when he's moving from station to station, going to have some continuity within the scheme, that he was generally above average across the board in his floor sample. It's just a major red flag that interceptable pass rate has been the highest he has been since he's been in college, and it's well into the danger zone, almost 11% in these situations. You just cannot put the ball into danger's way that often. Howard's a little bit of a divisive quarterback, but I like his upside, and I think he can help Ohio State get to where they want to go and potentially get himself to the next level. He's got that prototypical size, 6'5", 240, very confident body language in the pocket, smooth operator. He is a just a natural guy in drop back situations, particularly using play actions. This past season, he didn't have a single interceptable pass or a sack taken against his hardest opponents, and he saw an increase in accuracy. Of course, if his feet are fine, he is fine. And this obviously showed up being nimble in design rushing situations. He had a very nice broken tackle rate despite being a quarterback on a 53% success rate against his hardest opponents. Good stuff, but we're here to talk about his passing. If his feet are fine, he is fine, targeting beyond 10 yards downfield. No impact quarterback had a better accuracy percentage on these throws than he did, particularly because of his mid-range offering. So he might not be the best outside the numbers, but inside, he is really, really strong, targeting contested tight windows and coming away with key completions. All the more impressive because, again, he's 6'5", and his best receiver last year was 5'8". It's like throwing to your little cousin. You have to take a little bit of the zip off the ball. You have to make sure that he can be comfortable himself coming down with the pass, and it's just always not a easy trajectory to consistently hit guys that way. Even though he is a cool customer, he doesn't get sped up. Good stuff, but yeah, it's a little bit of a slow release. That's got to come it's got to come out a little bit faster because it does invite pressure, and pressures were a major source of his boo-boos last year. Major source of his interceptable passes. When I said his feet are fine, he is fine, that usually was not the case when pressured. He had inconsistent bases, and because, again, being a soft tosser, not necessarily having a lot of zip on the ball, they were a little bit more prone to being altered and ending up in the hands of defenders that way. So that's just really something you got to look out for, especially in interior pressure when it's coming right up the middle and he has to throw off his back foot. So he does sometimes float outside the pocket to buy himself a beat and to find a throwing lane. It's just, when he's stuck in the pocket and he has nowhere to go and he has to throw off that back foot, you got to watch yourself out there. And again, I already mentioned being able to be more consistent, be more impressive, targeting outside the numbers this past season and the year prior in his impact sample. That was just not good. But again, I think because of how he's going to be paired with a great play caller, he's going to be potentially behind a top 10 line, and he's got to have one of the best pass catchers in college football at his disposal. I think Will Howard is an easy buy entering this fall.
Now here's Will Howard's chart, and you can see how he did favor stuff towards the inside, particularly inside the hashes. So not a lot of spectacular work outside of the numbers, particularly towards the left. That is a little bit of a concern when he has to throw across his body. And you can see deep downfield, there's not a whole lot of field stretchers. They're all kind of in the middle of our graph, signifying they did not travel deep downfield. But still, he was one of our top performers, targeting beyond 10 yards downfield, down to down accuracy. So the scheme itself, they of course struggled to have separators. There was not a whole lot of dynamicism within that receiver room. All verts, mesh, slants, true screens, again spacing curl flat patterns, and all curls were some of their most featured concepts. On time and time again, they did feature some floods like cross and sail, but they were not too particularly exhilarating, coming in with a sub 43% success rate. Things that worked out the best for him in the dropback game were things like slants and all curls. Very rudimentary type of stuff. So hopefully Chip Kelly's going to be a little bit more creative with how he uses him, because there was nothing he could overly lean on schematic-wise this past season through the air. Like I said at the top, Will Howard is a fairly divisive quarterback. Depending on how you interpret his statistics, can influence on whether you think he is a good quarterback or not. For me, I like his depth-adjusted accuracy. I like the fact that his raw accuracy is above average. I like the fact that his first down touchdown rate is above average. But if you're a hater, you can definitely pinpoint to an average explosive pass rate, below average uncatchable pass rate, and below average yards per attempt. Certainly, I do like the downfield stuff for sure, particularly in the mid-range. Howard owns the top mid-range accuracy in our impact study. It's just the stuff beyond 20 yards downfield are a little dull. And like we said, pressure consistently sours his mechanics. He had a low adjusted completion percentage and a very high uncatchable pass rate, with over 40% of his attempts being uncatchable even when you adjust for throwaways. So fairly moderate in that regard, but still, he is a true pocket passer. Like I tried to tell you earlier, he was 4 times more likely to have an explosive pass than an interceptable within dropback situations, and his accuracy figures shine. Certainly, he did have some uncatchables, and I do think that was because of his environment and not being able to have the best schemes, nor his guys being best separators. But I like the fact that he did show even extra potency using play actions. And when looking at him within structure, I do think that his raw accuracy being one of the top 5 in the group, his depth adjusted accuracy cracking 60%, finishing on the right side of an uncatchable pass rate with a very low interceptable, hints that he should definitely have much better statistics with an improved environment this fall.
Riley Leonard is Mr. Intangible amongst this quarterback crop. Cerebral and savvy. But let's not kid ourselves. One of his best traits is his legs. He actually had the highest yards per attempt amongst quarterbacks at the time of his first injury last year. And that's not worth nothing. He's got long strides, pretty good vision. He's a deliberate cutter. Boom. Very quick, very decisive, and he can cover ground in a hurry. Of course, in 2022, scrambles kind of muddied his numbers a little bit, but he either way, either outside of structure or as a design guy, he's a very effective ball carrier. Don't kid yourself. And of course, this past season, one of his better traits was limiting mistakes. Of course, staying healthy was an issue, but despite that, having a bum ankle, all that, he did not take sacks. He did not throw interceptables. That's not worth nothing. Again, when you're 6'4" and you can see the field very well and you can, process things at a higher level, scouts love to see that, even though your volume stats, your plays on the field maybe not has been as much as some of his contemporaries, but he is just displaying traits that people like to see. So his pocket climb is very, very strong. He keeps his eyes downfield, and again, using that lower body to manipulate and move in a very smooth, calm manner. That's what you like to see. Not a lot of panic in his ball game. In his 3-quarter release type of thing, he doesn't necessarily have to have his feet set all the time to throw a feathery on-target passes. He really shined in muddy pockets last year. Not everyone can do that consistently. So, and when you're looking at Duke's core concepts last year, now you can say that we're conservative in nature, forget about it. He still executed them at an above 60% success rate. That is phenomenal considering that those were basically 30% of his plays. So, very efficient guy, very cerebral, and of course, if he's able to be a little bit more potent this upcoming season at Notre Dame, he's going to impress a lot of people because that's one of the big drawbacks. Of course, being hurt this past season, his downfield offerings were bad. They were just bad. I mean, there's no way you can find many downfield wins last year beyond 10 yards downfield. So that's got to improve. His downfield production has got to improve. His potency has gotten to improve. But I think he has enough traits in terms of downfield capability, in terms of processing power, in terms of knowing where to place passes away from defenders. It's just, can his mechanics hold up across the entire season? Because he's just been banged up a little too much for my likings. Here's our guy's pass chart. His hardest opponents were Clemson, Northwestern, UConn, Notre Dame, Florida State, and Louisville. So we know that there was not too many downfield wins based on what I just told you, and there is this pass chart, showing it off where he was not able to complete stuff. Not a whole lot of usage deep downfield outside the numbers, nor deep down the middle. Not a whole lot of stuff in the mid-range game, but yes, he did definitely get some completions in the short game. A nice pre-snap processor, a nice point guard quarterback, very savvy on knowing where to go with the ball and who to target underneath. So his most featured concept were those spacing crow flat patterns and slants. Both captured a plus 60% success rate against his hardest opponents. Not too far behind was the spot concept, mesh, Omahas. Those are quick out routes. So again, a lot of stuff that targeted short and sliced defenses sideline to sideline. I mean, he remains to be a hard person to cap because not only can he find these guys underneath in a timely manner efficiently, he's got that rushing ability that we already talked about where he led the nation basically among all quarterbacks in yards per attempt. Looking at our guys' general stats, they weren't great because of inconsistent ball placement. Fairly okay down-to-down results. And again, he did not put the ball into harm's way. It's just that 54% raw accuracy and the subpar, uncatchable, and depth-adjusted accuracies. Looking at his deep downfield numbers, he was one of the worst deep performers in our impact study. His intermediate numbers also remained fairly poor. Straight reds in his process metrics, and with his injury kind of hobbling him in the passing game, that permeated through very poor passing accuracy. When we're looking at him in structure and true dropbacks, when we're stripping away screens and RPOs, he was a fairly more close to his overall numbers, but still a low yards per attempt, a fairly lower average depth of target, not great potency, and not great raw accuracy ball placement figures. Outside the pocket when he was hurt, he did a good job limiting mistakes. It's just the fact he threw the ball away more often than not, trying to live to fight to another down rather than trying to find people downfield. Limiting mistakes is good. Overall potency playmaking remains to be seen. In structure, yes, he still shined for the second straight season, capturing a very serviceable success rate and first down touchdown rate. It's just that low ceiling with the low explosivity and the moderate accuracy in this context makes it be a little bit more of a murky output than it was this time last year. Of course, he was hurt. He didn't have the best supporting cast, so you can easily talk yourself into it because of his moxie, his ability to work from muddy pockets, and his overall a cerebral approach to the ball game. Brady Cook made some serious strides last fall, and some think there is further room to grow for the Missouri Tigers. So his dropback mechanics were some of the prettiest in the class. So that's definitely one thing he has going for him. A very smooth and sturdy process. A quick release, they go up and out. Ball is held by his mid-sternum. Very nice balance. He doesn't really turn or shy. It's very up and down release. He does have a little bit of bounce though. He keeps his inertia hot, but that plays into his instincts to bail out of the pocket very keenly. He has very good instincts in that regard. Even though he's not the best eraser in the world, he knows how to get away from pressure. And the past couple of seasons, he's been a pretty effective design rusher. In fact, in 2022, how he was able to be featured on quarterback draws all but saved Missouri's season and arguably Eli's job. So let's not forget about that aspect of the game, even though Missouri's scheme is very much an outside zone driven approach. But speaking to those very sound mechanics, you just gotta love how he's a very consistent distributor within structure. He's very cerebral. He can read defenses well. He knows where to go with the ball. But of course, he has one of the best cheat codes in the game, and Luther Burden. But of course, that was a little bit of a double-edged sword, because when he did try to force it to him, on occasion, he was much more prone to throwing interceptable passes. In fact, across the season, his interceptable pass rate targeting Luther Burden was more than double against everyone else. That is very, very significant. And of course, because he's not the biggest guy in the world, only 6'2", 205, he, like some others, can be prone to dropping his eyes when resettling and trying to move around in the pocket. And of course, once he drops his eyes and tries to do backyard ball, he's much, much less effective. So besides locking onto his guys, one big area of opportunity for him is improving in the mid-range game. Of course, Missouri's passers, they don't really like to focus on this area of the field. It is a dink and chunk operation, focusing on short and deep. But if they can be threatening in an entirely other area of the field, it opens up so much stuff and potentially giving more space underneath for Luther Burden to gain a step and get bigger plays. So I think he can make some further strides, and he's just got a fantastic foundation because of those strong mechanics. But, I wouldn't say right now he has a key underlying strong trait. He's good in a lot of areas, not great or elite in anything else. Right away on his pass chart, we can see that he did not do the best driving the ball downfield outside the numbers with his good, not great arm. Yeah, some deep wins, but just looking at that mid-range, you can see that is a major area of opportunity for him to grow this upcoming season.
No doubt about him being able to attack the flank and the flat underneath. It's just, can you drive the ball downfield and not put the onus on your receivers to do the heavy lifting on your targets? Schematically, the top 3 concepts that he did target against his hardest opponents all finished with a plus 50% success rate. So those are sail looks, stick, and dagger. And if you ask me, Missouri's form of dagger is one of the more creative wrinkles in the SEC over the last few seasons. Now, things that didn't really help him too much: curl flat patterns, solo shot plays, switch variations, usually a cheat code for a lot of offenses. It just did not really help his bottom line whatsoever. But it was a very balanced script. They didn't really lean on any one thing too much, and they kept opponents guessing. And again, when you have Luther Burden, you have the whole playbook available at your disposal. So his statistics in our impact sample followed the theme that he was good, not great. Generally acceptable results in terms of success rate, explosiveness, and not throwing the ball into harm's way, but his process was a little mediocre. Even though you gotta like the fact that his deep accuracy, his deep completion was fantastic. I already aforementioned he was terrible in the mid-range game, one of the worst performers in our impact study. And even though he is a fairly fine guy within structure, when the heat is on, he can be disrupted. Even though he does have those smooth mechanics, they can be altered. His placement can definitely sour when he's under the gun. In true dropback situations, above average across the board, except for his tendency to sometimes biff a throw. But a good amount of on-target passes as is. And when he uses play action, a fantastic risk-reward quarterback. It wasn't really a major part of their scheme, but in our meaningful minute sample here, a 63% success rate, 0 interceptables, and the top adjusted completion percentage at 81%. So, outside the pocket, like his stuff against pressure, definitely not the most dynamic player, but he is a high floor passer. Doesn't necessarily want to stretch the field, but he will find underneath completion and try and keep you ahead of the change, as we can see from fairly decent passing floor numbers. It's just his accuracy is a little bit concerning, even though he does get those good results. So he could be a regression candidate unless that is shored up this season.
Noah Fifita is another one of these guys that lacks idea of physical size and traits, but he's still a very capable college quarterback because he falls right into the point guard quarterback style. Quick processor, quick trigger, good against pressure. And in my opinion, even though he does lack a little bit of verticality, I think his best trait is throwing intermediate darts, particularly on end breakers. They are generally on time and on target, and they can lead to even bigger gains after the catch because they are delivered in an optimal manner. So he does need to have a little bit of inertia in the pocket. You can either trade that up to being a short guy, needing extra momentum to put zip in the ball, or if he's just truly manipulating throwing lanes so he can see the field a little bit better. He cannot be a sitting duck in the pocket. He's constantly having to moving. That said, Arizona liked to keep him inside the pocket. Even though he had heightened returns on the move and on rollouts, he was generally a pocket passer. So sometimes he will float outside left or break rank right in order to see the field better, but generally he does operate inside the pocket. And even though, you could say that having that inertia is a sign that he might lack ideal arm strength, and that did show up beyond 20 yards downfield, just kind of not the returns you want to see from one of the top returning passers, but he was really strong against pressure. He was not necessarily caught in bad positions, bad bases, and again, the ball tended to come out quick. Against the blitz particularly, he had 14 touchdown passes last year, and that led the nation. So even though, he might not be the best vertical field stretcher, he can still go out and get completions, and arguably, you can make a case that he's the nation's most accurate quarterback on a per throw basis ahead of 2024. But some people will also say that comfortable being stationary in the pocket is something to monitor. If he's constantly having to bob and weave and change his throwing platform, well, what can you do if you see a guy late? Are you still going to be able to drive the ball downfield and hit him on the money? I will say that his stature also comes into play into how he sees the field and how his passes come out. So again, he's kind of like Bryce Young in the sense he has to get on his tippy toes sometimes to throw over the line and short over the middle. That's just not an area of strength for him right now. Sometimes it's really tough to get up and over that level and still hit the guy where he needs to put the ball. But in terms of just overall operation, he's going to have a really strong supporting cast. He's got one of the best pass catchers at his disposal this fall. So if he can add a little bit more potency with some downfield production, he certainly can be a top 10 college quarterback this fall.
From Fifita's pass chart, you can see right away there's not a whole lot of verticality. So his hardest opponents were Washington, Washington State, Oregon State, UCLA, Utah, and Oklahoma. He really did, even though he does have that positive inertia like we talked about, playing like a boxer, struggle to drive the ball downfield outside the numbers, particularly towards the left. A lot of dead spots, a lot of red X's in that area of the field. Now, targeting short and behind the line of scrimmage, we know he liked to target surefire completions, get the ball out quick, and let his outlets do a lot of the damage after the catch. So looking at his stuff statistically, it should not surprise that things like stick, slant, Ohio, rub stuff like mesh, flood variations in the play action boot game, and sail were all over his passing profile. Plus, true screens were not too far behind either. But when looking at all verts, only 2 of the 11 worked out situationally. That has to improve. He has to develop a little bit more teeth, a little bit more tenacity attacking downfield, because if he can only target short, yeah, his floor is going to be high, but people want high ceiling quarterbacks who can play outside of structure and help elevate their offenses with big gains, splash gains that can help negate mistakes and raise a margin of error. Some people might be able to quibble with his statistics, but I believe he has the opportunity to be college football's most accurate passer this fall. Of course, targeting short, he lowered his degree of difficulty, but when he captures the best adjusted completion percentage, raw accuracy, and uncatchable pass rate in our impact study, it's really hard to dismiss, because when you deliver on-target passes that consistently, your guys are generally going to keep you ahead of the chains and give you successful results. So, we know deep downfield and outside the numbers, that was not his strong suit whatsoever, but he still tracked to be an above average downfield placer of the football. And because of his positive inertia, he still was a very strong process and results getter when outside the pocket and when he was pressured. Sure, there are some red flags, especially when he was pressured. He was more prone to interceptables than explosive passes, but a very high rate of on-target passes that basically stuck with him across the board. Whether in the dropback game or truly outside of the pocket, he really was a consistent ball placer. So he has a high floor like we know. In true dropback situations without guys inside the pocket, his raw accuracy and depth adjusted accuracy were among the best in our study. And like his overall, he was very successful with nearly 60% of his passes beating situational goals in this context.
Donovan Smith is a guy with translatable traits. Let's start with his prototypical size. He's 6'5", 240 pounds. You don't have to necessarily worry about him taking a beating or restricting yourself attacking certain areas of the field, because he can see over the line, he can process, and he can deliver. So with that size, the next question is, can he move? Check the box, yes, he can. So even though he's not the fastest of foot, he can't win every edge, he is certainly a capable design runner, and he's very, very effective seizing available real estate on scrambles if the defense drops back and there's no one in the screen. So, but in my opinion, one of his best traits, one of the things that he just absolutely looks very, very pretty doing is throwing the football. Again, he looks the part. Mechanically, within structure, I would say prettiest in the class. Very good, nice balance, up-out delivery, no wasted hitch in his motion. And that really shines, helping be consistent placing downfield passes. On targets beyond 10 yards downfield, he was one of the 10 best in our impact study doing so. Green flag. And even though he isn't the most fastest of foot, best sack eraser, he does beat pressures with that quick release, with that quick arm. And when you're talking about him inside of structure, of course, NFL scouts really like guys who are potent off-play action, who can drop their eyes, take their attention away from the secondaries for a beat, help sell some deception tactics, and then relocate their target downfield. Very nice processor in the play-action game against his hardest opponents last year. So I already mentioned that he is a fairly mobile guy, and he's got good mechanics, so you like to see that translates to being a nice throw and chase quarterback when outside the pocket. He's not letting his momentum take him one way, drift it, affect his lower body stuff. He recenters, gathers himself, and he has a nice, exceptional throw on the move capability. So I would not say he has an elite arm, though. Despite having, prerequisite size and traits, it just doesn't really show up in his deep ball. And you could say that this may have been an idiosyncratic thing or a coaching point, but sometimes he drags his back foot on his deeper throws, and of course that adds a little bit more resistance, and that of course that could kill balls, naturally lead to more contests, more now throws where he's not optimally placing the ball downfield away from coverage. And despite his very nice mechanics, there's not a whole lot of fastballs or next level throws on tape. That's just something we have to see. We have to see him be a little bit more potent, a little bit more of a good producer consistently. So even though, and yes, like I mentioned, very pretty mechanics in structure, in clean pockets. When pressure comes, sour stuff starts to happen. He can wince and turn his shoulders away from pressure. He can hunch his shoulders with someone barreling towards him. That's just not what you'd like to see. Him bracing himself with his size, you'd like to see him stay tall, hang tough, and deliver passes. Over the course of our impact study, I think he does have the prerequisite downfield accuracy, the process to be a very successful quarterback, but he's got to put it all together. And here is Smith's pass chart. It's fairly balanced. He didn't really favor any one area of the field, but clearly, as you can see from those green circles on the right side, he was much more productive attacking his dominant side as opposed to the center side. But he was still fairly undercut by those drops like we talked about. But balance short, balance behind the line of scrimmage, mid-range game, and deep. Not a whole lot of favoritism whatsoever, nor towards either side of the formation. And his hardest opponents were UTSA, TCU, Texas Tech, Texas, Kansas State, and Oklahoma State. So looking at the stuff that he liked to feature, unfortunately, his overall success rate was only 39% when including sacks and designed runs. Looking at his most targeted concepts, it was fairly basic air raid stuff as we could come to expect from Dana Holgorsen. So it was wide cross, verts, spot with dual slants on the opposite side, mesh, solo shot plays, as well as divide 9-8-9. So a fairly vertical approach, but like we saw from his passing spray, very balanced, attacking all levels of the field. The issue was finding consistency. So there wasn't a whole lot of concepts by themselves that finished above a 50% success rate. Only 2 of his 10 most targeted concepts finished above that threshold. And looking at his statistics, he had above average process and below average results. It's one of the big findings I wrote about in our impact study. And as we aforementioned, that was largely due to a high degree of drops. 13% drop rate across his overall sample really did undercut his bottom line. So we know from downfield, he was a fairly good placer of the football. Didn't really stand out in terms of deep, but mid-range accuracy was fairly strong. But that was also a fairly high source of his interceptable passes. And even though, like we mentioned, very clean within structure, he sours a little bit mechanically and in terms of results when under pressure. In his true dropback game, his overall statistics are basically maximized in the same manner because how the air raid doesn't use a whole lot of schematic elements to buoy the bottom line. Above average process across the board, below average
results across the board as well. So we do like how we can throw and chase outside the pocket. Unfortunately, those are when his process and his results were even more on the opposite ends of the spectrum, with a high depth adjusted accuracy but a success rate in the low 30s. Still, in structure, we gotta like how he maintains that strong accuracy, how his down-to-down ball placement is strong. Now, we can quibble about the fact that he does have a high degree of uncatchable throws. Some of his passes do get away from him, but I do believe because of his process, and even though he does suffer from a high drop rate, that he is going to be able to stabilize a little bit this fall, despite playing in a new scheme, having some new receivers, and losing his awesome left tackle, Patrick Paul.
Garrett Greene is a fun quarterback. Fiery producer, undersized, not very consistent. But let's focus on the F stuff, the fiery results, explosive passes. So he really does lean into downfield offerings. Over 46% of his passes last year against his hardest opponents traveled beyond 10 yards downfield. That was the top mark in our study. And it wasn't like he was just nibbling, throwing back shoulders. He was leading guys downfield. Juicy arms, darts with purpose in the mid-range. Very, very impressive stuff considering his size. So even though he was used outside the pocket, his returns, seeing the field a little bit better on those snaps, cannot be dismissed either. So very fun, very low pressure to sack ratio. He is a nuisance to bring down one-on-one. He's got the nice burst to get away from defenders and get himself to available green grass, both as a design rusher and a scrambler. You know, against his hardest opponents, he almost averaged 9 yards per scramble. Definite playmaker. The question with him is consistency, like I mentioned. Being undersized, not necessarily being able to see the field all that well when you're anchored inside the pocket. Get him on the move, clear up those throwing lanes for him. He has to do that a little bit more. And because he's consistently changing his throwing bases and on the move, his accuracy, his consistency is just not there right now. So you do like the fact that he has a high ceiling, but that floor is very, very murky, because even when clean, inside a structure, without guises, he had red flag returns in both of overall accuracy and interceptable pass rate. So he's got to get more dependable within structure. He's got to be a more consistent ball placer. Even though very nice backyard baller, can you be trusted down to elevate your team, stay ahead of the chains, and not always have to bail yourself out on ladder down? So again, 30% of his attempts were outside the pocket. That's extremely high no matter who that is. Again, even with the heightened returns, just having so much of that stuff having to be outside of structure is a little bit of concern for what he can stack together and build upon this next season. So he's not going to get magically taller. He's going to have to work within his means, within the pocket, knowing how to be a little bit more nuanced in that respect. But in terms of delivering key completions, he's one of the best in college football doing so, because he is just innately aggressive.
And here is our fun players pass chart. A lot of verticality as promised. So a relatively low amount of passes in the short and behind the line of scrimmage game. A lot more in the mid-range and downfield. So a decent amount of stuff outside the numbers. A decent amount of stuff deep in the middle of the field. So he didn't really favor a whole lot of stuff, but it was clear he was not the most strongest guy throwing over the middle. It's tough for him to get up and down with how often he moved outside the pocket to take care of business. Even though he was a big play machine, plenty of explosives on tape, it was just really hard to find consistent wins. So speaking of how Neil Brown liked to move the pocket, plenty of dash sail looks, play action bootlegs, switch variations though of any concept. They were the most featured with 18, almost a 12th of his plays on average, but a 22% success rate. That is just well below par. Speaking of other things that also targeted deep shot variations, only 1 out of 9 of those came through. Now, dagger was a little bit better. Some of those floods were a little bit better when targeted downfield, but those are not the returns you like to see whatsoever. So a lot of his concepts
came in below par, and it was a lot of their subsidiary looks that really did buoy the scheme. All in all, a sub 40% success rate when using his key concepts. That is just not going to cut it no matter who you're playing. And to ensure you I'm not making this all up, here are his statistics that just really hammer home his inconsistency. A group low adjusted completion percentage, barely half of his passes were on target, and with such wayward accuracy, he really had trouble putting together consistent completion. So he was generally explosive, but the consistency just was not there. And when we're isolating his downfield stuff, he came in the below average as well. Considering he puts a lot of weight into those passes, that is just not good bang for a buck opportunity, especially considering that a quarter of his deep balls could have been picked off. So across the board, he just was inaccurate, no matter the context. You know, undersized and not necessarily having the best physical traits, he was not good against pressure. In the drop back game, he was one of the few passers to be below 50% in overall accuracy. And even though he did gain a little bit of teeth with play action, he just generally was not the best guy in these true drop back situations. He just was not dependable. So his passing floor, even though he does have a little bit of a ceiling to offer, it's just very untrustable ball placement. He cannot blame pressure, and he still turned in the worst raw accuracy percentage, the worst adjusted completion percentage, and one of the lowest success rates when clean inside the pocket. Sure, you can blame some of that to his high degree of difficulty pushing the ball downfield, but that just has to be better. You cannot have over a quarter of your passes be wasted in these clean, pristine situations. A good amount of people are jumping on Graham Mertz's bandwagon ahead of this fall. I mean, he's a former 5-star. He's got that ideal aesthetic and build, and he's got really smooth drop back mechanics. So he used to be a little bit more of a rotational thrower, putting more stress on his torso, the middle part of his body, but now he's done a little bit more up and out, transferring that to his back and allowing his lower body to get a little bit extra oomph into passes. And that, of course, that resulted in being a very accurate passer last year. Now, he did focus towards the line of scrimmage quite often. His average depth of target was one of the lowest in the country. Nearly 30% of his passes targeted behind the line of scrimmage, highest in the SEC. But he passed up opportunities for throws he knew he couldn't complete for surefire completions. And he did not throw the ball into harm's way. He did not give opponents a whole lot of chances to get him off the field. So again, that translates to great numbers on paper. 2,900 yards, a 73% completion percentage, one of the highest yards per attempt in quarterback ratings in his career. But however, he became the SEC's preeminent checkdown Charlie with that modus operandi. He passed up guys commonly downfield. Only 14% of his passes were contested. So that should tell you that even if Florida did not have elite separators, he was not throwing his guy the ball unless they were fairly open on average. So that very high checkdown rate. He joins Mac Jones and Will Rogers as the only guys in the history of SEC StatCat charting to have a double-digit checkdown rate in a single season. Of course, when he is targeting behind the line of scrimmage on nearly 30% of his passes, you could surmise that he tended to take what the defense gave him. However, there was also signs that his downfield accuracy just was not strong, and that was the case in 2022's impact study when he was at Wisconsin. This past season, he finished below the SEC standard in both raw accuracy and uncatchable pass rate targeting beyond 10 yards downfield. And when looking at throws beyond 15 yards downfield, his 45% uncatchable pass rate was the highest in the conference. Even though he is very comfortable moving outside the pocket towards his right, you could say he favors his dominant side a little too much. Half of his passes targeted outside the right hash this past season. He's the only SECer over the last 3 seasons to basically do that. There's a high usage, that is a high makeup towards that dominant side, and some of it can be explained by pressures, but sometimes it could be by his buffering and just extending that way and just favoring that side of the formation. So even though he's fairly average, getting away from sacks He was fairly good against pressure. That overall muted style of play is just not going to help Florida raise its bar this fall. Of course, one of the games that they stole last year was because he was more aggressive in the second half. Think of the South Carolina game. They do not win that game unless Mertz is taking chances downfield, giving his guys opportunities to make plays. They may not have been perfect passes all the time, but that aggression definitely gave them more teeth and gave them definitely more explosiveness. So moving forward, can he put it all together? Can he throw downfield with more consistency?
So here is our guy's pass chart. It just naturally does not look impressive whatsoever. A lot of stuff behind the line of scrimmage, a lot of stuff towards the right, like we said. Heightened returns in terms of completions in those areas. When he went downfield or looked leftward, those are where his numbers definitely took a nosedive for the worse. Unfortunately, one of his better games, the South Carolina game, was completely omitted from our sample because it was not among the hardest opponents that he faced this past season. So his hardest opponents were Utah, Tennessee, Kentucky, Georgia, Arkansas, and Missouri. He just has to develop a little bit more tenacity throwing downfield consistently because he just cannot rely on these yak-oriented receivers to change his perception as a passer. In terms of schematics, play-action bootlegs where he was able to use his mobility, again, generally attacking the right side of the formation, really did help his returns. A near 60% success rate and an 8.4 yards per attempt on those plays. But nearly 16% of his targets came on a true screen or a check down. So when looking at other things that really left things to be desired, smash variations, Portland Yankee shots, deep double moves, even really gimme scuff like spacing curl flats, they all came in with a sub 43% success rate. You got to see more heightened returns on those types of things. Now, there are some silver linings in terms of the schematics, but he really needs to gain more teeth if the Gators are going to beat expectations this fall. And as we know, those low bar throws really did help Graham Mertz pad his accuracy figures. Even though he did not throw the ball into harm's way, it's a very concerning red flag that his explosiveness was below par and that his depth-adjusted accuracy was below par. Again, when you weight his passes, he just did not check the boxes this past season. Only 17% of his deep balls against his hardest opponents were perfectly placed, and he came in below average in the mid-range game. Against pressure, that's one of his best selling points. I already mentioned basically a third of his dropbacks suffered from a form of duress, but he came in above the impact average across the board without posting a single interceptable pass and having one of the group's highest raw accuracy percentages in that regard. That absolutely is a big selling point for him, no matter how conservative he is. Limiting mistakes is not worth nothing, especially when pressured. Basically the same stuff that was true overall manifested in his dropback game. Very low interceptable, very worrisome depth-adjusted accuracy, and kind of middling overall results. So, already mentioned the stuff outside the pocket. It fairly mirrored his pressure returns, but in terms of results, a 60% success rate and a 50% first down touchdown rate were among the best in the group. And in this instance, he actually was relatively explosive. He was 6 times more likely to log a 20-yard or more pass than an interceptable pass outside of the bookend. So his floor is okay because of his modus operandi attacking short, but if his guys cannot bring in passes, it really does lower Florida's margin of error.
Tyler Van Dyke squarely falls into that pocket passer archetype. He's got fairly good size, quick release, capacity to deliver on mid-range passes on things like skinny posts and slants. He gets tall in the pocket, a feathery up and down release, very minimal lower body involvement in his operation, and he has really strong anticipation skills. So the phrase I like to use, if you're even, you're leaving, meaning if you're even with your guy on a downfield route, let it go. But if he's capped, the guys behind him, obviously he'll try a little bit more back shoulder ball and putting it in places where only his guy can get it. Very savvy, very apt passer in that regard. Knowing that he does a lot of his damage with his arm as opposed to his legs. That stuff is paramount. And you like the fact that he's coming off one of his most accurate seasons. He's putting good process with good results down to down. Targeting beyond 10 yards downfield, he's one of our top performers in our impact studies. But don't kid yourself. He risked the biscuit plenty. 76% of Miami's impact study snaps came when Tyler Van Dyke trailed by at least a field goal. Nearly 40% came when they were down by 14 points. So he commonly had to press, he commonly had to heat seek for big plays. Of his 21 interceptable passes in his sample, 11 came when down by at least 14 points. So he's got to learn that he cannot get all those points back in one play. He's got to be a little bit more consistent down to down, avoiding those tight windows. So even though he is very good at that type of stuff, it's just putting the ball in the harm's way a little too much for my liking. He has a 3-year sample saying, he's not the best consistent passer when pressured. He's not the most consistent mid-range passer, especially because of his minimal lower body stuff. When he doesn't have a sound base, he can have some inconsistencies, some wonky throws, and of course, as we saw, it can lead to some turnover-worthy plays. And with him not being a twitchy athlete outside of structure or outside the pocket, he's not a good sack eraser. He's not a good extender. He cannot be used in the design run game. So you could say he's a little sluggish. He's a little Mac Jones-ish. But of course, Mac Jones in college within structure was a dynamic executor. Can he get to that level? If he can scrub away interceptable passes, I believe he can, but still, that is not an easy fix. But of course, not being behind so often can obviously curb his modus operandi and his spray. And here is his pass chart. Like I said, it's fairly balanced. There wasn't a whole lot of emphasis on any one area of the field. Both left and right sides of the formation saw fairly equal usage and delivered fairly equal returns. So, I mean, we know there's going to be high interceptables because he pressed when behind the gun, but if we were to overlook them, this looks like a passing spray of a fairly successful quarterback. Enough downfield wins, enough wins short, a lot of blue circles. Looking at the concepts that he leaned on, both of his core flood patterns, cross and sail, came in with a plus 9.4 yards per attempt and a plus 50% success rate. So all verts and switch variations, vertical pass patterns, those made up basically a seventh of his makeup against his hardest opponents. Some area of opportunity for him is being able to execute these staple short passing game looks like the spot, triangle, snag family concept and curl flat patterns. Both of them came in with a sub 20% success rate. And considering they were among his most targeted looks, that is a fairly concerning rate of return. So moving forward, playing in the dairy raid, he still should see some carryover in terms of the things that they like to run, particularly with all verts, stick, all curls, wide cross, but still he's got to deliver more consistency without putting the ball into harm's way. Now, we can talk ourselves into backing Tyler Van Dyke, but he's got to go out and prove that he doesn't necessarily have to be that aggressive and still be a good, capable, consistent passer on down-to-down situations. Because when we look at his raw, uncatchable pass rate and his depth-adjusted accuracy, there are encouraging signs that he could be a top passer next year. Again, when we are weighting his passes on throws beyond 10 yards downfield, his raw accuracy was around the 10 best in the group. His uncatchable pass rate was one of the best in the group. But again, those were a high source of his interceptable balls. And particularly when he was pressured and he was sped up, he was definitely all the more prone to put the ball in the harm's way. But as aforementioned, no matter what breakout, that is a major red flag on his profile. So even though he might have above average accuracy, he might have moderate results in terms of success rate and first down touchdown rate, even in clean drop back situations without guys inside the pocket, he had a double-digit interceptable pass rate. That is just really, really concerning. Below average accuracy percentage and fairly moderate depth adjusted accuracy percentage. You wonder just how much juice. But I still believe he's going to be playing in a scheme where his prerequisite accuracy and his capabilities within structure can elevate his situation and regain his perception as a next level passer. Drew Allar is a big kid, and his size helped him out in a number of ways, even against his hardest opponents. Obviously, he could see over the line and be able to target areas of the field where short guys just can't see all that well. Not the case with him. And when he got his momentum going, he's a hard guy to knock back. A lot of girth in his frame. A lot of good upper body stuff that you like to see from his throwing mechanics. It's a tight, compact delivery where he tucks in his off-arm elbow. There's not a lot of errancy. There's not a lot of elongation. It's very nice, compact, and consistent to the point where he doesn't always have to have a sound base. So using that strong lower body of his, obviously he can bust out of sacks on occasion within the pocket. He can deal from muddy pockets, with things not being in pristine conditions, and he can still get the ball out and not take sacks. His mid-range zip, hardly lose any oomph, and downfield targets arrive with little effort when he wants to target these things. Of course, that was the concern, was getting more potent play out of him, throwing downfield a little bit more, because he was definitely out there to minimize mistakes and try and keep his offense to live to fight another down. Very low sack rate, very low interceptable pass rate last year. So even though he did have a high level of disruptions, so let's just pull together throwaways, drops, batted balls, being hit when throws, his combined number of those snaps was one of the highest in the country. Obviously, that hurt his bottom line. That hurt his perception. Still, you just got to like how his downfield offerings using that strong upper body consistently showed up on tape. However, again, he's got to get more consistent just throwing downfield. Forget about the short stuff. When targeting beyond 10 yards downfield, he did not shine in our impact study. In terms of explosive pass rate, he owned the sample's lowest clip. That's not going to fly. He has to give Penn State more potency this fall. They cannot get to where they want to go just by logging less mistakes than their opponents. And being that pure pocket passer, upper body driven type of guy, there's not a whole lot of twitch or burst in his lower body. It's a very deliberate moving style. He's not going to run away from a whole lot of rushers. He's not going to be able to extend a whole lot or do much damage in backyard ball. So I would say he's a little rusty in that regard. Absolutely, of course, with that downfield accuracy, a little rusty. Now, he's got that blue chip pedigree, and like we talked about with that nice process, he could maybe put some more things together, but he's got to have more comfortability, recognizing when people are open downfield with anticipation, vertical anticipation, being a little bit more comfortable, trying back shoulders on occasion. If guys are covered, matched up, can you feel comfortable to throw it on the outside in timing and in rhythm? He has the capacity to do so, but he has not put too many examples of that on tape yet. And here is Allar's pass chart. His hardest opponents were Iowa, Northwestern, Ohio State, Maryland, Michigan, and Ole Miss. So we know that he was a distributor. He could hit the flat fairly well, but yes, there's just not a high rate of return targeting downfield. Now, especially towards his dominant side, that was a major shortcoming. He only completed 9 of 21 passes. Hell, he only completed 1 deep ball period against his hardest opponents. That is far too few. I don't care how often you want to try and negate mistakes. You have to be a little bit more aggressive. You have to deliver more explosive completions to help your offense raise their margin of error. Now, in terms of his top targeted pass concepts, Y cross, it worked half of the time. Same with the spot concept that was commonly paired with dual slants on the backside. A very common pattern, but that came through more often than not. Everything else, however, really had poor returns. We just mentioned the poor deep accuracy. Well, all verts and switch variations both came in with a sub 28% success rate. That's far too few. So you can parse and find some silver linings in some of his situational offerings, some of his conceptual executions, but generally speaking, outside of his favorite looks, there are just far too few of wins within structure in that regard. So Drew Allar's overall results are just not really sexy on paper. So one of the lowest yards per attempt in our study, one of the lowest explosive pass rates in our study. Just keeping the ball out of harm's way was not enough. All of his ball placement metrics fell below the impact average overall, and because of that, his results really did struggle to pop off the page. Now, we know downfield, he really did struggle to throw catchable deep balls. Over half of them were uncatchable, and as we know, only one of them were completed. And when looking at his mid-range numbers, they hardly excited themselves. So downfield accuracy, not a strength. Pressure was not a strength, even though he didn't throw the ball into harm's way. Drop back accuracy, raw accuracy, a big concern to the fact that it was below that 50% threshold. With his deliberate moving style, he's not the most twitchiest of athletes, but it's still interesting to see, to me, when he was outside the pocket, he did have increased verticality. He had a 15.2 average depth of target. And as we know, there were a lot of disruptions across his profile, but even when you explain all that stuff and you isolate his throws to just being clean inside the pocket without guises, it's really hard to explain why his accuracy was below average, his uncatchable pass rate was below average, his depth adjusted accuracy was only middling, and again, his potency was very, very poor with only a 3.5 explosive pass rate. So there you have it. You made it all the way through. Pat yourself on the back. I hope you found those breakdowns insightful of the top 16 returning Core 4 volume passers based on our preseason on-3 impact rating. So if you found those informative and insightful, be sure to tell your friends about it. Like, subscribe, and all that type of jazz. Be sure to follow me on X at SEC_StatCat. Check out the home site, Jimmy's and Joe's, X's and O's, and stats you just gotta know about your favorite SEC programs at SECstatcat.com. And also, if you are a general college football fan, do make On3 a part of your favorite website tabs. Breaking news, recruiting, and fun fan site outlets for many, many of the top brands in college football. But until next time, I am Clark Brooks telling you to have a good one.